Good morning and welcome to my studio. I've received a couple of questions in the last week about Giclees, both in terms of when you know it's time to start doing reproductions and how you actually get involved in doing that and choosing someone to do them for you if that's what you're going to do. And then also a question about hand embellishing Giclees in terms of what exactly that is and why you would do that. So stick around if that interests you, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So first, let's talk about why you would get into doing Giclees and when. I know a lot of artists, they think, oh, I'm going to start doing prints. I'm going to sell all these prints and make all this money. And it's not that easy. When it comes to selling prints, the one thing you have to keep in mind is there a demand for it? And so what I often say to people who are thinking about it is, it's time to start thinking about selling prints when you can't keep up with the demand for your originals, or where the price point of your originals is starting to get to a point where people can no longer afford it. And then people actually come and start asking you, do you do prints? So that's what I would say. I know one question was from someone who was a relatively novice artist about getting involved in doing Giclees. And unless you're having incredible success in terms of sales and demand for your work, I would not be looking at doing prints as a novice artist, because the thing is, if you're not selling your originals, it's very unlikely you're going to sell prints of your work. Now, Brooke is a very kind of unique situation. She's in her first year of pursuing her art career full time. But she's doing incredibly well with her originals. She's won 3 People's Choice Awards. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, the most important award, because it's people out there are your potential clients. If they love your work and your originals, then there's a good chance that they will also be interested in your Giclees. And she is also kind of dancing as fast as she can in terms of painting, and is not able to keep up with the demand. And she has a lot of younger fans on Instagram who are not in the position to be spending money on originals, and so they're interested in the prints. But she started into the prints mainly because she was just getting bombarded with requests from people for her to do prints. So that's the first thing I would say, is if you're not selling a lot of your originals, you don't have a huge pent-up demand for your work that you're unable to meet, I would not even consider doing prints, because you're just going to end up having prints that you can't sell as well. Now, if you do decide that it's time you want to get into doing reproductions, one of the questions was, how do you go about choosing someone to do it for you? And that's the $128,000 question. When I was initially published by one of the big publishers, the top fine art publisher in the world, for a couple of years, and what I realized was that the goal of any publisher is to make as much money as possible and to pay the artist as little as possible, preferably never on time, and preferably never as much as what the artist thought they were going to get. So after a couple of years in that situation, I walked away. They were late paying me. They weren't paying me what they're supposed to. So I rescinded their right to reproduce my work. And then my goal was to find someone that I could use to do my reproductions so that I could start selling them on my own. And what I found was that I could not find anyone who could do the quality of work that I wanted. And so after about a year of wasting several thousands of dollars, taking stuff into what were fairly reputable printers, and asking them to do proofs of my work, and then having to pay for it and getting back these horrible reproductions, I decided that if I was going to do this, I needed to figure out how to do this on my own and control all aspects of it. So that's what we do. We do all of our publishing in-house. And with the beautiful thing about the internet and YouTube now is you can learn how to do pretty much everything. So I learned everything from, in terms of how to shoot the artwork properly, how to do the digital imaging. We bought the equipment to do the printing, the varnishing. The only thing that we don't do is the stretching. because that is something that takes years and years of experience to get really good at. So for that question about how do you choose someone, the only way really is to give them a chance to do a proof, and then make your decision based on that. Now I have to tell you that when this was going on, this was about 10 years ago, when digital publishing was still fairly new. So all of the printers that I went to were old offset litho guys who were being dragged kicking and screaming into the digital age. They really had no idea what they were doing. They didn't understand the difference between digital and offset lithography when it came to doing all of the subtle changes and everything. So maybe that's changed, but I don't know. I do know that I get asked all the time by artists who does my printing, because they want to get theirs done by the same people, but we're in a position right now, we're just too busy just handling all of my stuff. So if you are an artist who really is in a situation where you are going to start doing prints, I would recommend wholeheartedly that you investigate all of the technology, you learn how to do it, and you do it yourself. You can actually get set up with an Epson, I think it's a 7500 or a 7900 printer that will produce, I think it's 24-inch wide prints for a few $1,000s. And most digital cameras now, if you've got a digital SLR, and you have Lightroom and you have Photoshop, you have all you need to put together a very good image to do prints that size. And that's what I would recommend, because if you're paying someone to do the photography, if you're paying someone to do the actual printing, and then you're selling through a gallery, you're having like 3 separate people make a living off the sale of that piece. If you're doing it all yourself, you can keep your prices very competitive, but then you can also reap all the rewards. So when it comes to publishing, I would recommend anyone to do it yourself. The one thing you do have to make sure of is there's a demand, because no matter how good the quality of your prints, if the original artwork itself is not good enough, no one's going to buy these great prints of a mediocre piece of art. So that's when it comes to the actual doing of the Giclees. I just recommend do it all yourself. Now, I also had another question about hand embellishing a Giclee, what exactly that means, how you go about doing it, and why you would want to do it. So the basic idea of hand embellishing is you go back over top of a piece of artwork and you paint over top with thick bodied acrylics. At least that's what I use. I use thick bodied acrylics that are heavy bodied acrylics that are mixed with modeling paste, about half and half, to give them a really thick texture. And then you go over top of the actual Giclee, painting in strokes of color. Now this can actually be quite tricky, because what you're trying to do is not change too much the overall impression of the piece. So you have to be matching the colors. You even have to be matching it. If it's a stroke that has a bit of orange and a bit of red in it, you need to actually pick up that on your brush and put that stroke on. And do it in such a way that it leaves a very, very pronounced texture. And the whole idea of this is at a glance, it looks like an original because there's very pronounced brushwork on there. And as I say, to do that, I use heavy-bodied acrylics mixed with modeling paste. And why you would want to do it? Well, first of all, for me, I started doing it because there was a demand for it, just like the prints in general. Initially, we were just selling the Giclees, just the regular Giclees, but after receiving lots and lots of requests for hand embellishing, it's like, okay, well, I guess we'll do this. And the reason you do it is it can generate more earnings. So typically, you're going to double the price of a Giclee, or pretty close to that, for the hand embellishing. And for your clients, there's a lot of people out there who want something just a little bit more than the run-of-the-mill Giclee, and they want that texture. And they also want something that's touched by the hand of the artist. Now, I know a lot of the publishers out there, again, the whole publishing industry, I'm not a huge fan of. They actually have apprentices trained to hand embellish pieces by their big artists. So if you buy a hand embellished Giclee from one of the big publishers, chances are that artist never touched it. They've got young people right out of art school that's all they do is spend their day hand embellishing paintings. But for me, every hand embellished piece that we sell, I actually hand embellish it. So the people want that. They want something that's actually been touched by my hand. Um, and I'll show you my palette here that I've used. So these are acrylic paints that I've squeezed out. I've mixed with, again, the heavy modeling paste. And then if you're going to use these, then you want to make sure you use those stay wet palettes too to help keep them wet. Because as you know, acrylic dries fairly quickly. So you need to have a lot of paint on your palette to be able to get that textured effect on there. And you don't want it all drying out in one day. Typically what I do as well when I'm hand embellishing, I'll get several pieces that have similar colors that I need. And I'll probably have, I have 2 palettes going on for this and another piece. But then I'll hand embellish a bunch of Giclees at the same time so that I don't end up throwing out all the excess paint. But that's the, so that's the whole kind of thing about publishing Giclees, when it's time, how to get involved doing it, and for the hand embellishing. Now the one thing I would say too, typically when it comes to prints, you want to have a significant variance in the price of the print and the price of the original. And 20% is kind of typical for someone like at my level. So if you're paying $2,500 for a Giclee this size, or sorry, for an original this size, then you're probably paying around $500 for a Giclee. If you're only charging $500 for an original, and by that same math, you're only charging $100 for a Giclee print, it really doesn't make sense, because by the time you pay for the cost of the print, you pay for the cost of the stretching, and if you're shipping it, you pay for the cost of the shipping, you're pretty much just at a break-even point. So that's also why I wouldn't recommend doing Giclees early in your career, because chances are your originals haven't yet reached the point where it makes sense. And if you think about it, if you're charging $500 for an original, then you're charging $300 for a Giclee. Why would anybody buy the Giclee when there's a huge difference in the actual value down the road between an original and a Giclee? So yeah, you want to make sure there's a huge demand for your work, that the price is getting to the point where people are no longer able to afford it, and they're actually asking you for Giclees or prints. If you're not actually getting all 3 of those things, I would really recommend you don't even consider doing prints, because they're just going to end up collecting dust under your bed. So that's it about Giclees and about hand embellishing Giclees. I hope you found this helpful. As usual, if you have, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe. I welcome your comments and questions, and I thank you for your time. I'm Tim Packer.